Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolutely fascinating remedy profile of Theridion curassavicum. If you've ever wanted to see a literally perfect illustration of the homeopathic law of similars playing out in real life, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to look at how this tiny, incredibly sensitive creature provides the exact blueprint for treating a very specific, highly reactive kind of patient. Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with the spider's origin, move on to the shattered filter, look at its paradoxical symptoms, explore the frenetic mind, and finally wrap up with some practical clinical applications. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the spider's origin. So, right off the bat, the crucial thing to understand is that we are not dealing with some massive, hairy monster here. Unlike the huge, tissue-destroying tarantula, Theridion is tiny. But hey, do not let its size fool you for a second. It packs a highly potent neurotoxic venom that actually causes severe tetany and physical collapse. If you were out looking for it in the wild, you'd spot it by this very distinct orange or red stripe running right down its abdomen. And keep those colors in the back of your mind, because they're going to pop up again in a pretty surprising way. This is where it gets really fun, and it brilliantly shows how nature and medicine intertwine. This little spider originally comes from the island of Curaçao, but it spread all over the globe by hitching rides on merchant ships. But it wasn't just any ships. Specifically, it traveled in shipments of bananas and oranges. Now, here is the absolutely fascinating part. Patients who need this homeopathic remedy, they'll often exhibit intense, almost unexplainable cravings for, you guessed it, bananas and oranges. It's kind of like the patient is subconsciously trying to recreate the spider's favorite Caribbean cruise. Plus, they often show a strong, totally unexplained affinity for the colors orange and red, matching that exact stripe on the spider's back. It's just this quirky, real-world historical connection that perfectly mirrors the clinical picture. Moving on to section 2, the shattered filter. Listen, if you only take one single thing away from this explainer, please let it be this quote right here. For the Theridion patient, sound is a traumatic event. We are not just talking about being slightly annoyed by a loud TV in the next room. For these folks, sensory input penetrates so deeply into their nervous system, completely bypassing any normal acoustic filter. Noise literally acts like a physical hammer striking their body, and it causes absolute agony. Think about the profound hyperreactivity we're dealing with here. A normal patient has a functional sensory filter, right? You and I can easily tune out the hum of a refrigerator or the sound of cars driving by outside. But the Theridioning patient completely lacks this acoustic isolation. When they hear a sound, it doesn't just register in their ears. It triggers actual physical pain, severe nausea, violent chills, and even these deep, aching bone pains. Literally just the hum of a ceiling fan or the subtle vibration of riding in a car is enough to make them totally collapse in discomfort. Now, to really understand why this happens, we've got to look back at the spider itself. The Theridion spider spins a suspended web and then just sits perfectly, rigidly still inside it. It completely relies on those delicate silken threads as a literal extension of its own nervous system to detect the micro vibrations of tiny prey, like little flies or beetles. And just like the spider depends on feeling the absolute tiniest vibrations to survive, the human patient becomes painfully, exquisitely attuned to the slightest acoustic vibrations in the air around them. Okay, let's dive into section 3, paradoxical symptoms. There's a really crucial paradox here that you absolutely need to memorize. Vertigo is incredibly common in Theridion cases, but it acts totally backward. In standard vertigo, a patient often experiences nystagmus, those rapid eye movements, so keeping their eyes open actually makes the spinning worse. Naturally, what do? They close their eyes to calm the sensation down. But our Theridion patient? No way. They feel immensely, terribly worse the very second they close their eyes. Closing their eyes severely aggravates both the vertigo and the nausea. It's a massive red flag. And honestly, the neurological oddities do not stop there. They'll often experience what we call the detached head sensation. It's a bizarre but highly defining symptom where the patient feels as though their head is completely separated from their body, or even like it belongs to someone else entirely. Now, this is super reminiscent of the remedy Illumina, but here it actually mimics the biological reality of the spider, which has a fused head and thorax, the cephalothorax. Clinically speaking, we frequently see this specific detached sensation in patients who've suffered some kind of physical trauma, particularly a whiplash injury from a car accident.
When we zoom out and look at their overall triggers, the hypersensitivity is just undeniable. They are severely aggravated by noise, vibration, any little movements, closing their eyes, and surprisingly enough, sun exposure, which is a lot like natrum carb. On the flip side, they're ameliorated by warm applications, rest, and intense immobility. And notice that word intense. The patient will stay rigidly still, not because they're feeling calm, but because they are terrified that any movement or vibration will trigger their agony. And this actually extends deep down into the skeleton. They have extreme bone sensitivity, feeling like their bones might just shatter. Historically, this remedy was actually a primary treatment for Pott's disease, which is spinal tuberculosis.
All right, moving on to section 4, the frenetic mind. This really reveals an exhausting, survival-driven mindset. The patient falls squarely into the tubercular miasm, and that means they have this frenetic internal rhythm, oppressive shortness of breath, night sweats, and just a complete and utter lack of energetic reserves. They simply cannot store energy. Now combine that with the animal kingdom theme, where they constantly feel like they're in a fight for survival, cornered by some hidden threat. Yet, because they belong to the 5th superclass, they're highly operous. They desperately desire to build complex structures and organize their lives, unlike the tarantula patient who often just fakes being busy. So they're desperately trying to build something without having any reserves to actually sustain it. According to homeopathic researcher Peter Fraser, web-spinning spiders like Theridion exist in this really strange middle ground. On one hand, you have the earth, right? It's grounded. It's all about worldly competition and physical risk. On the other hand, you have heaven, completely spiritual, disconnected from reality, much like the bird remedies. Well, the Theridion patient is suspended right smack in the middle. They refuse to touch the ground and engage in normal worldly competition, but they also can't just fly away into spiritual detachment. So they just sit there in their suspended webs, building these highly complex but incredibly unstable lives that honestly could be blown away by the absolute slightest breeze. Let's bring it all home with Section 5, Clinical Applications. When you're doing a differential diagnosis in your clinic, Theridion should immediately jump right to the top of your list for 3 specific conditions. First up, Meniere's disease, especially when you see unilateral hearing loss, roaring tinnitus, and extreme vertigo that's actively triggered by noise. Second, severe motion sickness in cars or boots. It's a lot like tobacco, but with that crucial keynote we talked about, it gets worse immediately the second they close their eyes. And third, post-whiplash trauma. If a patient comes in after a cervical car accident complaining of chronic vertigo and that bizarre detached head sensation, you really need to think Theridion. But its reach actually goes even further than that. In pediatrics, it's an incredibly useful tool for hyperactive rachitic children who are failing to develop properly and who wake up in absolute night terrors at the slightest pin drop of noise. In the dental and facial sphere, you'll see patients whose severe toothaches or facial neuralgia are directly triggered by everyday environmental sounds. And in the sexual sphere, we see an exacerbated sexuality, featuring intense morning erections entirely without mental desire, and a severe spasmodic pain in the groin right after coitus. So from failing development in kids to these very unique modalities, these distinct physical symptoms always point back to and confirm that underlying systemic hypersensitivity. I want to leave you with this golden confirmatory question. When you're sitting with a complex case and you're starting to suspect this profound lack of a sensory filter, don't just ask if they dislike loud noises. I mean, everyone dislikes a jackhammer, right? Instead, ask them this. Are you more sensitive than others to sounds in general? Getting them to compare their baseline to the rest of the world is absolutely key here. When that filter is completely shattered, Theridion might just be the web that holds them together. But it does leave us wondering, in our increasingly loud, hyper-stimulating modern world, how many shattered filters are walking into our clinics entirely misdiagnosed?